Welcome, everybody. I'm Ahram Weekly, Director of the Issam Institute at AUB, and we're glad to have you with us for our second memorial lecture, the Nadim Makdisi Memorial Fund Annual Lecture Series. This is a lecture series that we started a few years ago. And the plan is every year to invite a distinguished personality from the Arab world or abroad who can share with us some views about the media and the relationship between the media and public policy and international affairs in the region. But before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to ask Richard Makdisi, the son of the late Nadim Makdisi, to just say a few words and share with you some thoughts about why the family launched this the Memorial Fund, which gives grants to AUB students and the lecture series. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Rami. I guess
it's going to be right from
all right. I'm gratified to be here, first of all, because it's the first time that I've been able to attend the second annual conference or the second annual presentation on behalf of my father. And I certainly know that this is just the type of lecture that he would really enjoy. And it's also gratifying to see so many of the offshore and onshore audience here with the Makdisi clan and many friends as well. Thanks to Rami and cousin Kareem for putting this whole thing together, because you've done a great job in finding a topical speaker like Hani here, which would have been much to something that Dad would have really liked. And also, it's something I've noticed is that with the Arab Spring and the confusion that seems to be unfolding and trying to interpret what's going on, particularly in the West, there's a lot more voices coming out from Arab journalists, which my father would have appreciated. And it makes for a much more deep and nuanced perspective than you tend to find in the American media that presents it in this very simplistic way of either it's the dictator or it's Islamic fundamentalism at play, and those are the two narratives that you can hear. So my father, who would have been 91 in a couple of days, would have loved to have been here to see the Arab Spring unfold. Unfortunately, he wasn't. But he would have been the first person in the door here to listen to this lecture and probably be hammering you with many questions afterwards. And I'm happy to see, notwithstanding all of the recent Beirut and Lebanese travails that are going on, that AUB and the Ferris Institute in particular seems to be in the vanguard of cross-pollinating and keeping the subjects of Middle Eastern politics and economics and journalism going on, and that's a really good thing and something that my father would have appreciated greatly. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for being here, and to all of the Makdisis, the multitudes of Makdisis that have been involved with this process and many other parts of IFI. I think if Nadim were here, he would, well, he's with us in spirit, but he also probably should be, is the kind of person who, over the last 30, 40 years, worked to prepare the groundwork for this change in the Arab world. There's many historical figures in journalism and public activism and civil society and politics who spent most of their adult life working for change in the Arab world, and that change is starting to happen, and we hope it will continue to happen and for the better. But this is a historical process which is underway, and I think we need to acknowledge the pioneering work that many people did over the years, including Nadim Makdisi and many others. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Hani Shukrallah. And let me just add one other thing, that the Nadim Makdisi Memorial Fund, which we are honored at the Issam Institute to be entrusted with, holds this annual event and also offers research grants to AUB students. Later we hope to open it to other master's students and graduate students to do research on issues related to the mass media and public affairs. And this is also another contribution that we feel privileged to manage on behalf of the Nadim Makdisi's family and heirs. And this is something that we hope will continue to develop as the fund grows, and we can offer more and more fellowships to really understand the many dimensions of what's going on in the mass media today and in the wider scope of communications in the Arab world. And Hani Shukrallah is one of the best people we thought of to share his views with us on these issues. He's in the eye of the storm in Cairo. He's been there for many decades as a working journalist, and he has been with the Al-Ahram organization in different forms for some years. He used to be the managing editor of Al-Ahram Weekly, and now he's the managing editor of Al-Ahram, the Arabic newspaper, but spends most of his time running Ahram Online, which is a very impressive, substantive English language website covering Egyptian affairs and regional affairs. He's published several books, most recently Egypt, the Arabs and the World, Reflections at the Turn of the 21st Century, which was published in Cairo by the American University in Cairo Press. He is also the executive director of the Cairo-based Haykel Foundation for Arab Journalism, and as I said, the chief editor of Al-Ahram Online. He's had many other positions he's held over the years, which you can read about on our website if you'd like. He's done consulting. He's been among the founding members of various the Egyptian Organization for Human Rights, the Arab Network for Human Rights Information, and many other institutions. So his experience and his knowledge and his vantage point in Cairo are ideal starting point for an analysis of the role of the media in the uprisings. And with that, I thank you, Hani, for coming, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm now divided. I have divided loyalties between this and that. Okay. First of all, let me express my very deep thanks to Rami, the Sam Faris Institute, and to the Makdisis for honoring me with this invitation. I love Beirut and I love Lebanon, and it was a great opportunity to come even for a day. I came yesterday afternoon. I leave tomorrow morning, because you know things in Cairo now are rather exciting. I couldn't afford. I would have loved to stay for a few more days in Beirut, but maybe on some other occasion. What Richard was saying about Nadim Makdisi, and that he would have really liked to have been here to see the Arab Spring. It struck me because, let me tell you, on the 11th of February 2011, I was in the newspaper with my staff, or part of my staff at least, when we were waiting for what was promised to be a statement, an important statement that was going to be televised. And of course it was the shortest statement in Egyptian political history by the then Vice President Omar Suleiman, in which he said that Mubarak had stepped down. Immediately I sat on the computer. I actually wrote the piece myself. I thought this was something that's... and I put the title, Mubarak steps down, Egypt celebrates. And And then I went out of my office and told my staff, okay, no work today, let's go and celebrate. And we went down, where Ahram is in the center of town, we all went down to Tahrir. But in Tahrir, whenever I met someone from my generation, the first thing we would say was, we lived to see it. It's something we'd been waiting for all our lives, and we actually managed to live to see it. So I share your feeling that it would have been really nice for Nadim Makdisi to have lived to see these days. Although, of course, they've turned rather grim than they were on the 12th or the 11th of February 2011. Okay, let me first of all turn your attention to a change I've made in the title of the lecture. I had promised to speak on the Arab Spring as a whole, but then once I started actually preparing the lecture, I figured that I'm much better informed about Egypt, and definitely your neighbor to the north, and you know much more about that, about him or it than I do. So I thought I would focus on Egypt, focus on covering the revolution and on the media and the revolution in Egypt, and obviously we are always astounded by how similar the Arab condition is, in spite of very different countries in terms of population and cultural makeup, but somehow authoritarianism has unified us, maybe as nothing else. This is not going to be a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to switch between this data show and speaking from my notes, and then switch back. So if you'll bear with me, this is always I'm technologically backward, and so let's hope it will be a smooth process. The one thing actually that struck me over the past year and a half about the media in Egypt, and about the condition after the revolution, it was really the contrast between truth and lies, or truths and lies, because I'd rather not speak in terms of the truth, but of the many truths that were around us and the many great lies that were around us. The revolutions are times of extremes, and somehow they push the adversaries into extreme positions, and this. We have lived over the past year and 5 months or 4 months, I don't know, under conditions where really what came to mind was Goebbels, was the big lie. You have killings being done right in front of you. And you see them on the internet. They've been reported by bloggers, on social networks. People have taken pictures with their mobile phones and so on. It's there. But at the same time, you have a state that continues, and it has its own bodies that perpetuate its almost flagrant lies. So people are killed, like as you see here. This, of course, where the truth lies is also the title of a film. I don't know if you've seen, but anyway, if you look at this is the site I'm in charge of. If you look at the top story here, It says, Egypt's chief coroner says Port Said football victims were killed by suffocation. And my colleague who was heading that shift picked this picture where you can see the blood on the seat. And of course, we know the evidence was there. People were being carried to the morgue with bullet wounds, with knife wounds. There were swords. People were thrown off the stadium, the top of the stadium, onto the ground. And it just shows you again where. And another incident, very famous incident, I'm sure all of you have heard about it, which was the massacre in front of the TV building at Maspero. If I may very briefly remind you, this was an occasion, this was October last year, and a sort of mini pogrom, anti-Christian pogrom had taken place. And the Copts, it had taken place actually with very clear complicity of the police bodies. Not just complicity, perhaps instigation. And attacks on Copts in Egypt have been, even from under Mubarak, not just after the revolution, have been very convenient distraction instruments of this regime and its police bodies, which are extremely cynical. So Egyptian Copts, accompanied by many Muslim activists, held this demonstration, protest demonstrations, and they took it from the district of Shubra, which is Christian dominated, or at least has a high percentage of Egyptian Copts, and they marched to the TV building in downtown Cairo. It was a totally peaceful demonstration. I'm sure you're aware, protesters in Egypt have taken pride since 25 January that they are in a peaceful revolution. This is their protests are peaceful protests. They are anti-violence. And then, but apparently it seems that the military who were bungling the governance of the country and getting more and more fed up with the continuing unrest, felt that this was a good occasion to make an example of someone. And obviously, Copts as a minority in a country, in a Muslim-dominated, Muslim-majority country, and where also for the past years we've seen a rise of bigotry and a rise of discrimination, this seemed a very opportune moment to make an example of someone. Okay, we don't want protests, we don't want demonstrations, it's over, revolution is finished, everybody go home, but doing it with whereby the target is an easy target. It's a target you could easily the huge scandal was not, it was a massacre. It was a massacre, a lot of people were killed, and a lot of young people lost their eyesight, received very severe injuries. And the scandalous thing was not just the massacre, was the behavior of Egyptian television, and this is why you have this picture. If you look at the caption that it says "Aigil," which breaking, and then Coptic demonstrators are throwing stones at the army and the police charged with protecting the Maspero building. And actually, Egyptian television in this incident, state television, played the role of they went on after that to say that Copts had arms and they were shooting at the army, and one zealous presenter called upon Egyptian Muslims to come and save the army. this was incitement. I have gone on Egyptian television and said, this is a crime that in any country that has a rule of law, this woman should have been brought to trial for incitement to murder and thrown in jail. Of course, it did not happen. The great irony is that just last week, after months and months and months of an army judicial so-called inquiry into the incident, they discovered that this young man is the culprit. He was the cause of. Now, this young man, this is a wonderful young man. I didn't know him personally, but I know a lot of people who have known him. He was in the Egyptian Revolution from 25 January. His name is Mina Daniel, and as I wrote here, he fought the revolution as an Egyptian. He was killed for being a Copt. And he has become an icon of freedom in Egypt. Since then, there is, which I'm going to show you later, there is something called the Mina Daniel banner. And every protest, you will find some of the protesters carrying this banner that carries the picture and the name of Mina Daniel. This quote, this very famous quote by a very famous media person, has really defined the behavior of the state in Egypt, of the transition, so-called transition state in Egypt for the past year and a half. We've got, again, the big lie, and the idea that if you tell a lie big enough, somebody will believe it. Let me give you some of the lies, just examples. During the 27th, 28th, 29th of January 2011, when the beginning of the revolution, the massive confrontation until the 30th of that month, the massive confrontations with the police, the shootings. In these confrontations, over 1,000 people were killed. Egyptian state TV had its camera pointed at, I don't know if any of you know Cairo, there's this bridge called Qasr al-Nil Bridge, an old bridge, and Egyptian TV's camera was pointed under that bridge where there was nothing. This camera could have been turned maybe a centimeter this way, and you had 1 million people. So for 2 or 3 days, you switch Egyptian TV, state TV, and you look under the bridge where there is no one. You flip over to Jazeera or BBC or CNN or whatever, and you see 1 million people engaged in enormous fighting with the police. So one lie. Other lie, of course, is the Battle of the Camel. These were, and we've had this repeated over and over and over again, where we have these so-called angry citizens coming in, but somehow the angry citizens are coming in with the police around them or with army around them, and they have guns and they have rifle fire, and they use whatever, they have swords, they have, and so on. Again, and then we got the famous speech by Omar Suleiman. Again, this is a theme that keeps repeating itself. A statement where foreign fingers were behind the Egyptian revolution, and this created and with the whole mythology of foreign fingers. They had this amusing, hilarious show on one of the private TV channels, which is very close to, owned by a businessman who's very close to the Mubarak regime. They got this young woman, and they covered her face. They had her face blurred or darkened, like when you get prostitutes or something. And they got her to confess on TV, this was during the revolution, to confess on TV that she had been taken by the Americans, she and others, members of 6th of April movement, and they had been taken to attend a seminar on how to make revolution. And actually the seminar was given to, to make so that the plot thickens. It was Jewish intelligence officers who lectured. So, so again, the theme of foreign and Maspero, as we talked about. In Maspero also, one of the TV building that I was talking about, one of the very amusing lies, but these lies always come at a cost. I mean, they're not really funny, because there is this very well-known Egyptian blogger, Ala Abd Fattah, an activist, and he was arrested and was kept in jail for about a month and a half or something, and he actually his baby was born while he was in jail, and his first son. But they had a woman, make this bizarre, absolutely bizarre, if you know the area in question, testimony. She was coming, I don't know from where, she was driving over a bridge, and she saw Ala, and that's why I call him Super Ala. Ala basically dismantle an army vehicle, beat up the soldiers in it, and take the arms from them, seize their arms, and throw them into the Nile. The woman saw all this, and of course, which makes Ala really a kind of Superman, and that's the kind of thing you keep getting over and over and over again. Of course, one of the most scandalous episodes of these past months have been the virginity tests. Women protesters arrested by the army were humiliated, abused, and subjected to virginity tests. This was covered up completely. And actually no one dared report it. No one in the Egyptian media, whether in privately owned or state-owned, dared report it. I can boast here a little, except our Ahram Online site. We're the only people who picked it up at that time. But, and this will be very significant as we go on in this discussion, the new media, the social networks, the bloggers, they forced this case on the public's attention, and they forced the traditional media to take it up, and the army had to open an investigation. Of course, just last week, as they found that Mina Daniel had caused the killings in front of Maspero, they acquitted a military court, acquitted the military doctor who was the one person charged in the virginity tests. Of course, the evidence that these things happened was enormous. So if you'd like to discuss this later. Again, we have the cabinet building, we have the interior ministry, we have the snipers, we have the shootings and these things. And finally, just lately, Abbasiyya, massacre upon massacre upon massacre, always denied. Always there is a third party. Not a single person has been arrested. We have these supposedly huge state apparatus, police and military intelligence and I don't know what, and not a single person of the third party. But again, I mean, here they lie, but images prove them liars. I'm sure you know this very famous, notorious picture. This is Samira Ibrahim. This is a Saidi girl, from a very conservative family, And she had the guts, and of course this is very difficult. I'm sure you know this even in Lebanon, but this is very difficult for a young woman to say that she has been subjected to a virginity test by a male doctor. I mean, Samira will have to marry a revolutionary. And again, as you can see, the lie is always contrasted by those fighting for the truth. As here you see, there's a person actually there being beaten, but the wall tells the story. There were no snipers. This has been said over and over again. There are no snipers in the Egyptian police. Of course, it's absurd because I don't think there's any police force in the world that doesn't have snipers. I mean, they keep because the lies make them. I mean, I keep saying I hope Israel is not listening, because. I mean, the way when they tell us that in Maspero, if there was any abuses or shooting, because the soldiers panicked. If you have an army that panics when peaceful unarmed demonstrators come, what will they do on the border if a couple of Israeli soldiers cross? No snipers in the Egyptian police. This picture, and again. Emphasizing how the new media is always after the lie, exposing the lie. So someone has taken, using again a mobile camera, picture of the these badges on the shoulders of these officers, which say Maham Qitaliya, fighting tasks, snipers. This young man here was actually recorded on video. Obviously, someone was behind him shooting with his mobile phone very discreetly, and this young man was shooting at the protesters' eyes, and he was boasting. We have him on the video boasting, I shot the son of a something right in the eye, and his soldiers are telling him, bravo, Captain, bravo. And of course they had to, because of this, they had to arrest him and put him on trial, but again, nothing has come out of it. This picture I took, you can't see anything actually. This is the American University, the old building of the American University overlooking Muhammad Mahmoud Street, which has become also very renowned in the past because it was the site of killings and so on. It leads to the Interior Ministry. But this is a sniper. I could see him personally, and I put it actually here because I took it. I could see that he's a sniper. He had the gun, and I could see him shooting. But again, we have no snipers. We did not use firearms. No one was shot. People died of suffocation or whatever. There were, and actually, some of the stories are totally bizarre, where you find yourself faced with the notion that this so-called Taraf Thalith, this so-called third party, is made up of this weird alliance of the CIA, the Mossad, Hezbollah, and Hamas, and the Iranians. And they're all out there because they hate Egypt so much and they want to destabilize it. So again, images tell the story, and images, these are not captured by the traditional media. They're captured by activists, they're captured by bloggers, they're captured by... We exercise tremendous restraint. They're beating an old woman who's probably a passerby. Again, no shots were fired. We did not abuse women. This was one of the more amusing lies because it didn't come from the military for once. This came from the Muslim Brotherhood, once, because at that time they were in a very, they were very lovey-dovey with the military. They'd struck their deal, and they felt, come on, let's rule together and finish this revolution and freedom nonsense. And so everybody was planning to go back to Tahrir on the anniversary, the first year anniversary of the revolution, 25 January 2012. And actually, in fact, of course, millions went down. I mean, at least 2 million people were able to be mobilized for that event. So before that day, the Freedom and Justice Party, the political arm of the Brotherhood, their newspaper published this very bizarre article, which with the following headline: "Anarchists Bandetta Mask to lead the chaos of 25 January." So there was an anarchist conspiracy, and the anarchists were going to, of course, what they mean is the V for Vendetta, Guy Fawkes mask, if you've seen the film. Lovely film, by the way. You haven't seen it, you have to see it. But anyway, and really, some of the revolutionaries in Egypt do wear the mask. But obviously, we don't. If we have anarchists in Egypt, there are probably 5, and they don't really have the capability of either conspiring or conspiring to bring 1 million people down on the and create mayhem. And what was, of course, very amusing, because I mean we had a great time on the various social networks with this story, because everybody was making fun of it, that they don't even know that it's V for Vendetta. They called it Bandetta. So everybody was making jokes about Bandetta and the threat of Bandetta and so on. Okay. I'm going to stop now and come back. Okay. Am I taking too long, Ahram? I'm just going to. I don't want you to see my notes, so I'm going to disconnect this. Okay. Now the challenge is to actually find the notes. Okay, I got them. Nothing is.
Speak into the microphone.
Yeah, sure. To me, this really put in very stark terms the dilemma of the truth and lies in when you were thinking of the media and the role of the media and the higher purpose of the media. And we're used to speaking of objectivity and balance, which are fine. But the objectivity is always, when people speak of objectivity, they always qualify it. Because you say that, they would say, yeah, you have to be objective, but we know that no one can be really fully objective, because we all come with our preconceptions, with our ideas, with our various biases, and so on. Which makes the concept pretty weak, actually. And then we speak about balance. But if you look at, if you're covering, for instance, the Battle of the Camel, what you're seeing is people in civilian clothes beating each other up, throwing stones at each other. You're seeing chaos and mayhem. And as far as people speaking, there is the state saying these are angry citizens, and there is the revolutionaries saying, these are police, these are people these are thugs mobilized by the police, and so on. So here, balance doesn't, on its own, if you say this story and that story, if you quote a police officer saying, we're not responsible, and you quote a revolutionary accusing them, you've got balance, but you haven't got the truth. And this is where really brings, and because this revolutionary situation that we've lived with for the past year and a half is so intense, because the confrontation is so devastating and so, it involves such a diametrical opposition between the counterparts. It really brings to focus the idea that actually the higher purpose of the media is the truth. And obviously, and here let me quote a couple of people who wrote this very interesting book. You probably know it, Rami. It's called The Elements of Journalism. Bill Kovac and Tom Rosenstiel. I'm probably mispronouncing the names, but anyway. And they wrote this book, they published this book in 2001, and they felt that there was a crisis in American journalism. And their basic argument is that, and here I quote them, journalism's first obligation is to the truth. Here we come, of course the truth is not readily available. If we have any postmodernists here, they're going to, hurl stones at me, because what's the truth? It's all discourse. But in any case, truth is not readily available. Truth cannot be reduced to mere facts. Truth is much more than that. But truth can be approached, and this is why I haven't used the word the truth, but I've used the truths. Truth can be approached. It can be approached through the story, and this is the essence of journalism. The essence of journalism is that it's a narrative of the truth. We cannot claim that we can transmit the truth immediately, but we give a narrative of the truth, and this narrative, and that's why we call it a story. And this narrative, if we are honest journalists, if we are really committed to the higher purpose of our profession, then this narrative tries with all sorts of tools, with the tools of objective reporting, with balance, with investigation, with analysis, with going behind the facts, behind the immediately apparent, with research, through all these, to create a narrative that approximates as far as we can the truth. To give, and this has to be a narrative that has to be coherent, factual, investigative, analytical, etc. Where is the story in a country like Egypt today? Where do we get our story? And here I'm going to say something. I remember being in many media conferences where people complain about the new media. They list these complaints: opinionated, biased, lacks verification, unbound by criteria of objectivity and balance. But being an Arab journalist, when you hear these things, you feel, come on. You're describing the traditional media. You're not describing, that's exactly, if you're describing Al-Ahram or Al-Akhbar or Al-Gumureh, that's exactly what you're talking about. Opinionated, biased, tax verification, lies, open lies, wrong, and so on. But in fact, what we have seen for the past years, and not just since the revolution, this has become very apparent since the revolution, but what we've been seeing for maybe 10 years now, maybe 5 or 6 years at least, is that the story that comes not from the traditional established mainstream media, it comes from Wa'il Abdel Fattah, and it comes from these bloggers, it comes from the social networks. These are the people who have reported about torture in police stations even before the revolution. These are the people who have exposed sexual harassment on Egyptian streets before the revolution. And really what's been happening is that the mainstream media has had to follow in their footsteps, which really makes a kind of multiplier effect. So yes, you can say, well, how many Egyptians look at the internet? Actually, quite a lot now. But even then, what happens is, as for instance, the story of the virginity tests, you get the bloggers and the Twitter and Facebook activists releasing the story, releasing the evidence, and then you get on TV feeling obliged to pick it up and actually showing some of the footage that was captured by citizen journalists of various types, and it becomes multiplied. Everybody takes it up. It reaches everybody in the country and abroad. And really that's where, again, with the virginity tests, as I was saying, the mini pogroms against Christians, all these things, it's been the new media that has been in the forefront of relaying the story, and of forcing the story on the attention of the mainstream media. Which brings us to that mainstream media. Please tell me, Rami, if I feel I've gone, because I'm going back to the PowerPoint. I want to show you some amusing things. Actually, that mainstream media has been and continues to be in a very deep crisis. Mubarak's 30 years of authoritarian rule were not just about authoritarianism. They were about the eradication of political space in the country. I think this is the main achievement of this man, is that, I mean, I grew up in an authoritarian Egypt. Egypt was, my lifetime is of one of living under authoritarianism. I didn't, but I remember my youth in the 70s was in a country which was extremely, intensely political. We used to, as students, as university students, we used to leaflets, and a very shabby, little piece of paper could trigger, an uprising. And then came Mubarak's blessed 30 years, where you had newspapers having torture on the front page, showing the torture on their front pages, and nothing happens. So politics became almost non-existent. And actually, if you think about it, journalism cannot exist without politics. Modern journalism is a creature of modern political society. And that's why, that actually explains, if you contrast, Lebanese journalism and Egyptian journalism. And Lebanese journalism, in spite of the problems of ownership and of Gulf money, Saudi money, Iraqi money, whatever money, in spite of that, Lebanese were able to maintain a very high standard of journalism, unequal anywhere else in the Arab world, because Lebanese society was a political society. It was a very vitally political society, even with the descent into madness that took place for a couple of decades or something. But so really, we did not have eradication of politics in Egypt the 30 years of Mubarak, so also the eradication of journalism. And really, if you look at the scene now, journalists don't have even the basic skills of writing a decent, news story, let alone a feature or an investigative report. I'm speaking about, of course, the mass of journalists, unfortunately, in the country. And also the profession became highly corrupted with overemployment, bad wages, and extreme corruption. So the journalists who were working for the intelligence bodies are too many to actually, and we've got some in my own organization. We've still got them. We've still got these guys who used to write reports on us to the state security intelligence. And of course the corruption, the blackmail of to get money, to get bribes, to get advertising, and so on. Also, the absence of politics. And this is an argument that I've been making very often in gatherings such as yours. The absence of politics made the political and the social conflicts in the country take the shape of ideological conflicts. And ideology without politics becomes religion. And I remember I was sitting in a panel with a leading Muslim brother. And I made this argument, and I looked at him and I told him, look, in a battle of religions, obviously the people who speak in the name of the most established religion in the country are going to win. You know, I told him that the fact that you came out of the revolution the most powerful organized force in the country because there was no politics. You survived in a country or in a society where political space had been eradicated, and you were speaking, and it was, you know, it was liberalism versus, it was left versus, it was ideological struggles, not politics. And that's why actually if you look at what's been happening since the revolution, that's why I think the revolution, in spite of being hijacked and subverted so much, has been such an amazing leap forward. If you just merely need to see the decline in the Brotherhood's popularity in the last 3 months, enormous. They still may take the presidency. I'm not saying they won't, but because they've been brought from this rarefied realm of ideology down to the ground of the very practical ground of interest of politics. Of course, one brilliant aspect of post-revolution Egyptian society is that they're televising parliamentary sessions, fully, and of course, so you know, it's great fun. It's the new soap opera, beats the Turks, beats everything. You sit and watch and look at these guys. It's really amusing. It's great comedy. So naturally, this has also impacted on the concept of journalism, on what journalists see themselves as doing, and what media organizations, how they define their role. So if you look at the Egyptian media, even although we had a space that definitely was not to be seen in many other Arab countries, we had a space for dissent in the media, in the Egyptian media for years now. But at the same time, the notion was that this space, that journalism's role is to, at best, be a platform for diverse opinions. So it's a ra'y wa ra'y al-akhar. But that's fine, but that's not the role of journalism. The role of journalism is to provide people with information to have, so that they can form their opinion. Certainly you must also, while giving the information, part of it is to give various, give a platform and exposure to the various views and leanings in the society. But lost during these past years, and to a great deal until today, has been our role as exposures of the truth, as searcher for the truth. And again, the contrast with Lebanese journalism, where this is so clear. So you have even Al-Hayat and Shukrallah, Saudi owned. But look, there is an enormous wealth of good journalism in even these two newspapers. We have, of course, the state-owned media is in deep crisis, which is multifaceted. One, of course, is that they see themselves as their master's voice. But the crisis now is that we don't know who's the master. So for a while, they recognized that the master was Tantawi and the military council. So everybody adjusted their discourse accordingly, and then their roles. But now everybody's guess, and you've got a real problem with now the Shura Council, which is the nominal owner of the state-owned press, or the state-owned press organizations. The Shura Council is dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood, and indications are the Muslim Brotherhood's deputies in the Shura Council are not looking for a truly independent media. They're not looking for a BBC or a public broadcast like in the States. They're looking for just changing the hats. So while Ahram's editor was taking orders before from Mubarak and Safwat Sharif, later from Tantawi and Anan, now they would like him to take orders from Al-Murshid and Mohammed Mursi, which does not bode well for the future of these organizations. But again, this is a battleground. This is a contested. Of course, these organizations also are in deep structural crisis. Because they are wasteful, extremely wasteful. Egyptian television loses billions of pounds a year. All the other organizations, maybe with the exception of Al-Ahram, but still enormous waste. I can wind up, okay. But I have to go back to my PowerPoint.
Q&A.
Okay. Let me wind up. So we have great many challenges coming up. The state-owned media is a challenge. The ownership is going to be one of the big challenges now. Arab Gulf money is coming in, and is coming in to grab a share of Egyptian political space and therefore of the Egyptian media. Freedom of speech and expression is already under attack. It's not just under attack by the military, but is under attack from other sources, which are the new rising Islamist bloc in parliament, which, as for instance, are now talking about. And again, if we speak about freedom of expression, it's also freedom of culture and artistic expression. Then they're talking about, censoring Egyptian cinema, even getting the old films. I was saying earlier, I was telling some of the students here earlier today, they want to get, Saad Hosni films and maybe, remove her bare arms or something, or cover her knees, or horrors of this sort. And once you start attacking freedom of expression and culture, you don't stop. You go on, you keep pushing it. So if you criticize the Islamist discourse or Islamist policies, this could easily become you're criticizing Islam. You're attacking Islam, and you earn your. So that's another very important challenge we're going to be facing. But at the same time, and this is the part that actually we can count on, Egyptians are very different people today. The amount of dynamism, the level of politicization, the level of engagement, the level of involvement, the young people who are these, what you might call barefoot journalists, the bloggers, the social media activists, the young people. We have had to counter the lies. We've had these amazing experiments in presenting an alternative point of view, in presenting an alternative account, an alternative narrative of reality. If you look at the explosion of graffiti art in Egypt, if you look at street theater, puppets. My own son, who's a student, he's studying computer science, he graduates next year, but at the same time he's become a graffiti artist and a puppet master. He makes, and on the 25th of January, they constructed, he and his friends, this giant Tantawi puppet, and they marched with it, making threatening noises in the 25 January demonstration. So this is creating a different climate, and it's impacting on the mainstream media with all its problems. It's impacting, it's raising the bar. It's putting the test of truth, putting everybody against the test, before the test of truth and of fairness and honesty. So that's what we can count on. And if I may, I know I've taken a lot of time, but if I may just show you a few things. They're fun. Of course, that means I have to know how to put this together. Okay, I think I've done it. So? Okay. This is one of the really amazingly beautiful pieces of graffiti that appeared in downtown Cairo just recently. This is a quartet of Salah Jahin. Those of you, a very famous Salah Jahin piece of poetry, and this is the protester, and he's throwing back a tear gas canister, and a dancer is coming out of it. Oh my gosh. Who's afraid of Twitter? Again, this is the alternative media, the alternative narrative of the truth. This one is a demonstrator who's the sign behind him on the Egyptian flag is saying exclusive lies on Egyptian TV. Graffiti again. Graffiti again, martyrs. Martyrs. Criminals. This is the officer I was speaking about who's captured sharpshooting at directing his fire at the protesters' eyes. Again, graffiti. Shows Facebook and SMS as ways of saying the truth. And of course here we've got and of fighting oppression. And we've got the cross and the crescent to symbolize the unity of Copts and Muslims. Scarf and thugs, one hand. This is a beautiful piece of graffiti, as you know, to protect the Interior Ministry, or so-called. They erected these cement walls across streets in downtown Cairo. And here, I don't know if it's clear, the kids actually made the street go on. They've made another one, I couldn't find a picture of it, with Hanzala at the okay. This is a very interesting way of where an alternative account. Oh, I didn't tell you. I forgot to mention the most significant, or one of the most significant aspects of this process lately, which was the Liars campaign. Probably a lot of you have heard of it. This is an informal campaign. No particular organization is behind it. Something like 28 organizations decided to join the campaign. And the whole idea of the campaign is to expose the lies of the military. It's called Askar Kadhibun. And the way hundreds of these activities have been, I couldn't get a number, but hundreds, literally hundreds across the country. Anything from AUC, Cairo University, Ain Shams University, to Zamalek, upper class districts, Zamalek and Heliopolis and so on, to Imbaba, Mitokba, shanty towns, villages. They've gone everywhere. And what they do is they set up all their tools of giving an account, a different narrative. So they have videos, they have video shows, they will put up a sheet on a wall somewhere, and they will have video footage showing the shootings, the torture, giving evidence. They will bring people who have been arrested or have been tortured and give testimonies. They will pamphlet, they will leaflet, they will have Punch and Judy shows, Aragos, and so on. And I will not, maybe I will just go to this one. Just to give you a little sense of the kind of thing that's that's being shown around the country. Sure. Sorry. Okay. This is the Mina Daniel banner. And that's a very famous quote. I don't know if you know the source. It's actually Jesus Christ. The truth shall set you free. I think this is what I believe is the higher purpose of my profession. And here I just want to end by paying homage to a dear friend. And as we're talking about Askar Kazibun, he reminds me of Askar Alamin, who is a wonderful Lebanese journalist, who actually in 2005, very bizarrely, I was chucked out of Al-Ahram in July. A month earlier, Samir had been killed. And actually, I wrote an article for Al-Hayat at that time in which I said, well, obviously Egyptian authoritarianism is much kinder than its Levantine counterpart. So at least I was just fired. He was killed. So I pay homage to Samir's memory. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hani, for that very rich and thought-provoking overview of events in Egypt, which I think resonate with many people around the Middle East and around the world. So we'll open it up for questions, comments, and please identify yourselves and wait for the microphone so that we can get it. This is being recorded to put on our website. In the back there.
Yeah, thank you for the lecture. I have a question about the presidential debate. Today, Al-Shorouk released a poll that seems to indicate that the debate has had a very powerful impact on the candidates. The two front-runners don't seem to be front-runners anymore. Could you tell us a little bit about how the Al-Ahrams and the non-Nile and Dream TV covered the debate. What's your impression of was there street theater about it? Any recent graffiti that directly tackled the presidential campaign and the debate? How are people talking about it?
The debate was actually very interesting because it really captured everybody. I mean, the novelty of the whole thing was just totally amazing for Egyptians, and we're not used to this kind of thing. It's very interesting. I was commenting the other day, Egyptians still don't ask you who you're going to vote for. They ask you, who are you nominating? Because we're so unused to the idea of voting for actually a president. So you know, it seems it's easier to say who are you? بترشح me. So yeah, the debate did have a negative effect on the two front runners, who then were the front runners, Amr Musa and Abu Futuh. But the problem with I really am very apprehensive about taking these opinion polls at face value. I don't know how they're conducted. Opinion polls, for as long as I have worked as a journalist, were considered a kind of spying. You had to get permission, which you never really got, from the intelligence bodies to conduct an opinion poll. So there were no opinion polls. So we don't know how truthful or efficient or these opinions. I personally would find some of the results that put, for instance, the Brotherhood's Morsi fourth place. I find that a bit, it tests my credibility, or I don't believe it easily, because I know the Muslim Brotherhood have been losing popularity. I know a lot of people are frustrated with them, but I also know that they have this massive organization that can reach hundreds of thousands of people. So you see what parliamentary elections have shown us is that Cairo had Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez created the parliament, the Egyptian parliament, you would have had a very the Islamists as a whole wouldn't have had more than 30% of parliament. So there is this huge Egypt out of these revolutionary cities, which are reacting and interacting with the satellite TV stations, with the media, with the revolutionaries, and so on. But there are these backwaters, massive backwaters, and we don't really know. We try to reach them, but you don't really know how much influence you have. We know that there is the security vote. There are people, poor people, not just the privileged, not just the crony capitalists of the Mubarak clique, but poor people who feel that the revolution is a disaster, that that it's creating chaos, and they want a strong man to push these revolutionaries back home and restore stability so that they can work and find jobs and earn their daily bread. How many are these people? I don't know. But these are the kind of people who would vote for Shafiq, for instance. So, but as you said, definitely, people commented immediately after the debate is that the winner was Hamdin Sabah, the Nasserist candidate, who was not in the debate, because people were Amr Musa came out as being arrogant and full of himself and incoherent, and Abu Futuh came out as all his liberal protestations. He came out as a solid Muslim brother who is going to apply the full sense of Sharia, which for many Egyptians is not there.
أولا شاكر تماما للمحاضرة، لكن كنت متمني يعني ملاحظة باتجاه الأكاذيب لم تبدأ بالفترة الأخيرة. الأكاذيب بالإعلام المصري والإعلام العربي والإعلام العالمي قديما. كنت متمني لو صار في تنويه بجهود مفكرين مصريين كثير مهمين ودفعوا ثمن حفظهم للحقيقة. مصطفى كامل السيد، في فهم هويدي، في إبراهيم عيسى، في علاء الأسواني. وبالتالي مصر ولادة كانت، ودائما كان هناك حدا قادر يحمي حرية الرأي بمصر. الملاحظة الأخيرة فيما يتعلق بالالتباس، يعني على الأقل النظام المصري لم يكذب فقط يا مبارك، وزي أي نظام آخر ولم يكذب، هو قتل أيضا. ولعل ما أخطر أنه قتل بضع أقواط هو أنه نظم وهندس مذبحة الإسكندرية وخلافها ليبرر وجوده. الملاحظة الأخيرة المعلومات المؤكدة حول واقعة الجمل أنه في حدا ما حمل الناس وفي حدا قتل الناس. السؤال اللي ترك أنا براسي اقتباس، أنا ما فهمت الأخ المحاضر المحترم طبعا، وين الإخوان المسلمين في هذا الموال؟ لأنه إحنا كلياتنا مشغولين باستيعاب ظاهرة اسمها حضور الإخوان المسلمين في الحياة السياسية العربية. في محاولة إصرار للقول أنه كأنهم شيء عدو وكأنهم هم حصيلة مؤامرة. الحصيلة المؤامرة لا تأتي بملايين لصناديق الاقتراع، طبعا لم يقل ذلك الأخ المحاضر، بس أنا على الأقل كأني حسيت وكأنه يريد أن يقول أن ثمة تحالف ما خفي بين النظام وبين الإخوان المسلمين. كثير بكون سعيد لو وضح هذه الملاحظة، وخصوصا فيما يتعلق بدور المفكرين المسلمين بحماية الحقيقة قبل الثورة، وكانوا بمواجهة الأكاذيب اللي بث النظام. شكرا.
طبعا انا موافق على ان المثقفين المصريين. امال الثوره جت منين؟ جت لان ناس كانت بتعد لها يعني اعتقد انا كنت متصور انه كان متضمن في كلامي، لكن يعني موافق تماما مع اضافه على اضافاتك المهمه. بالنسبه للاخوان المسلمين، الاخوان المسلمين شاركوا في الثوره وشاركوا من خلال شباب الاخوان. التنظيم كما نعرف الآن من شباب الإخوان نفسهم، التنظيم كان ضد المشاركة، ولكن الشباب أصر على المشاركة وبادر بالمشاركة، وفي يوم 28 جالهم أوامر بترك التحرير. ده كلامهم هم مش كلامي، جالهم أوامر من مكتب الإرشاد بترك التحرير ورفضوا تنفيذ الأوامر، وحدث ما حدث، المعارك الكبرى، ثم في النهاية القيادة وقفت وراء استمرارهم في الثورة اللي كان بدأ خلاص انها هل تم؟ طبعا بالتأكيد النهارده ما فيش تحالف بين العسكر والإخوان، ده بالعكس ماسكين في رقبة بعض يعني. ده والله يعلم وحده يعلم نتيجة هذا الصدام يعني. ولكن برضو يعني أنا ولكن كان هناك تحالفا، ده أكيد كان تحالف وقعد وبالعكس ربما الفترة الأكبر منذ أن قام المستشار المحترم طارق البشري بصياغة الإعلان الدستوري السيء الصيت الآن اللي هو كل النهاردة بيهاجمه، منذ أن تمت صياغة هذا الإعلان الدستوري وتم الاستفتاء عليه اللي هو الاستفتاء الإسلاميون في مصر طرحوا الاستفتاء التصويت بنعم على الإعلان الدستوري اللي عمله العسكر بأنه صوت للإسلام، وأن من يصوت بلا يصوت للكفرة وللعلمانيين وللأخبط. على فكرة يعني ده كان very clear. لا كان في تحالف والتحالف انكسر منذ ربما شهر ونص شهرين. انكسر لأن العسكر شعروا العسكر مش عايزين، مش ناويين يدوا السلطة لحد يعني. أي حد هياخد السلطة هم ياخدها وهو يعني معاهم، عارف ان هم ليهم وضع خاص والى اخره. فانا اعتقد ربما ان الاخوان شعروا بقوتهم، وشعروا بان ربما ان دي اللحظه التاريخيه بتاعتهم، بالذات ما يحدث في جاركم يعني الشمال، ان ده خلاص، ده الاخوان ممكن ياخدوا المنطقه. انا هقول لك حاجه، عصام العريان اللي هو بيعتبر احد المعتدلين في قياده الاخوان المسلمين، او كان يعتبر احد المعتدلين في قياده الاخوان المسلمين، في مؤتمر في القاهره منذ ايام، مؤتمر انتخابي، قال، عارف هتلر لما كان بيقول today Germany tomorrow the world، قال الاتي: هنحكم مصر، وهنحكم العالم العربي، وهنحكم العالم الاسلامي، وغدا اوروبا. في حاله جنون. لا، في خطر حقيقي. هم شاركوا في الثوره على عينه وعلى الراس.
In the front here, can you bring the mic? In the front here, Jean.
I just would like to know what you think is the future of the alternative journalism that's going on now. This very creative form of journalism, which is certainly much more interesting than the, sorry, with all due respect, than the professional journalists. Do you think it's going to be absorbed into the mainstream into mainstream journalism, or is it going to go on by itself? And what is the future of it? Thank you.
It's a very good question. I actually can't say with any confidence, but I hope it will not be absorbed. And I doubt that it will be, at least anytime soon, because it's got a dynamic of its own that it's almost impossible to absorb in the mainstream media. I mean, how do you integrate all these? These are hundreds of young people, running around the country, and they're very jealous of their freedom. They're very jealous of their independence. What you need to do is, whenever you can, provide them with perhaps the skills that probably they lack, and this is happening already. So they have been, a lot of them have been, learning how to edit film, how to. One of the videos I had, I would have liked to show you, but we didn't have time, was about the Abbasiyya massacre, the latest massacre. Which Abbasiyya, of course, the whole thing in Abbasiyya the whole episode was rather grim, because it really, again, this was we had this Salafi candidate whose mother turned out to be American, and he kept lying, and the man is a buffoon in any case, but has a huge following, and he was disqualified from running because the constitutional amendment, the constitutional declaration that was made by an Islamist judge, Judge Tariq al-Bishri, had, if you have if you're married to an American, you can't run. If you have ever had a foreign citizenship, you can't run. If you have a father who's a foreign, or a mother who had a foreign citizenship, you're disqualified. So it turned out this Salafi leader, Hazm Abdurrahman, his mother got the American citizenship in 2006 and something like that. So his followers were protesting. The revolutionaries, one problem about the Egyptian revolution is that, I keep saying this, they are great protesters and very inexperienced, inexpert politicians. So it was a protest, let's go. يسقط حكم العسكر وخلاص, down with the military. Anybody who's saying down with the military, we join. So the whole episode of Abbasiyya was a bit, confused. And again, also the Brotherhood at the time had begun its break up with the military, and again they pushed for some kind of protest to force the military to back down. So it was all very murky, the whole thing, but there was a massacre. The military and thugs, went with swords, and again in the video, this video was prepared by activists collecting material that was published on websites, that was collected by activists put on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, and they made a film, a whole film. I have another video which is very interesting because it was prepared by labor activists who are engaged in a fight with the owner, who's Muhammad Abu al-Ainin, a very famous, very rich man, one of the top people of the Mubarak clique, and he owns this company that makes bathroom stuff. Anyway, Ceramica, it's called Ceramica Cleopatra or something like that. And the workers went and made this film, obviously with help from others. They made this film where they combine the advertisement of the company, and these kids are using whatever, because it's become a huge network. So, you will have some of these kids are actually very savvy computer scientists. They have their own companies and so on, and they will teach others. They will teach them how to use the medium, how to shoot, how to edit, how to, and so on.
Any students back there? Back there and then here. And then.
Good afternoon. I want to ask a question about the woman's role in the revolution and the truth and the lies. Some say that the media has showed them in an exaggerated way. Some said that the media has underestimated their presence and their role. I mean, you have in Egypt the women like the blue bra women and Alia and Hani. How do you think women showed the women in the revolution?
Look, in the 18 days, the women were as integral to the revolution as anybody else. I mean, and actually, it was the whole. If you look at the path of the revolution, I remember one day, one of the protest days, and I was in Tahrir, and I was looking as these, young women were coming in. It was approaching evening, so and this group of young women who were veiled but fully made up, and dressed to the nines, and they were coming into the square. So it was almost an outing, but also they're joining the revolution. So there has been this whole panorama of but also, I mean, look, one of the absurd things, of course, of women are always targeted. This is how you break the men by attacking the women. So we have seen the virginity tests, the molestation, the woman who was the young woman who was stripped almost naked by the soldiers, and you get also this sense that it's not just there is because these soldiers are villagers from very poor backgrounds, and they keep giving them these pep talks of these are spies, these are the enemy, these are these women are all prostitutes and so on, and really they a lot of totally distorted probably class and male aggression gets of course. One thing I remember, one occasion, because also we've had occasions where the revolutionaries themselves have been rather abusive of women revolutionaries, and that is not a thing we like to talk about, but it's a very important thing to acknowledge. And you do get sexual harassment. And I remember one few women revolutionaries were talking about it, and they were saying, how do they get, we are under fire. the army is shooting at us, the police are shooting at us, and these guys are coming and you know, doing this. How do they get the, you know, so yeah, this is one of the ugly, you know, underbelly of you know, of a mass movement, I guess. I don't know. Front here.
I have two questions. One is about the situation now. Do you think that it requires another revolution, Muslim Brotherhood or the Military Council? You have, they are committing the same mistakes the Mubarak regime and any other Arab regime is committing, like the limitation of freedom of speech and taking all the power to themselves. And another question, what do you think the future of the Salafists? They started with very like big appearance in the media, and now it's almost nothing.
My personal expectation is that the next few years, I don't know, anything from 5 to 10, 20, I don't know, that we are going to be faced with years and years of instability and confrontation and conflict, and we're going to have a kind of Lebanese situation, but hopefully without the guns and the RPGs and all these things. I don't think anyone will be able to restore, you know, order in the sense of stable government and anytime soon. We have now, as I was saying earlier, in fact, the military and the Muslim Brotherhood are in very sharp confrontation today. And this is not, if the prospect of, if the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohammed Morsi, wins the presidential election, then you're looking probably at very serious ramifications. I don't know what these other guys with their caps will do. It's very dangerous, very dangerous. They may reach an accommodation. I mean, maybe that would be the time when the Brotherhood, okay, come on, let's deal. But as things stand now, it's very. If you get alternatively, if you get someone like Shafiq back, you've got 1 million people in Tahrir Square next day. And this I can tell you without hesitation. So it's anybody's guess what we're going to see in the coming years. It's really very, you know, I was just saying, you know, for 30 years you could plan your life for the next decade and be pretty certain that nothing much will happen. Now every week everything is, you know, the whole face of the country changing.
The Salafis?
The Salafis have been the big surprise as far as I'm concerned, definitely. I don't know. They sprung out like so many mushrooms after the revolution. I mean, it seems, you know, there was something like a, I'm kidding, of course, but almost, you know, there was a time when, you know, there was a call, you know, grow your beards, you know, and so all of a sudden you found all these bearded, you know, men going around the streets in their Afghani garb and with, you know, surrounded by 3 or 4 women in niqab. Where they came from, I honestly don't know, but definitely they have a discourse that has. They have a social discourse, which the Muslim Brotherhood don't have. The Salafis tell you, sure, you're poor, but you're devout. The rich are all going to hell because their women are sluts and their men drink alcohol and so on. And so that's as you know, it has rang a bell with a lot of people, obviously with a lot of people. So no, the Salafis are not over. They're going to be with us for some time.
Reporting on the ladies' question, and observing what happened in the blogging world over the past year, not just on the Egyptian journalism level, on the world level, Do you think that this is kind of another journalism revolution that will really, we've watched certain bloggers become really famous for their truthfulness and credibility and, you know, their way and their style. Do you feel like this is another revolution in the journalism world that will really bring journalism back to a non-corrupt state, where after every war, like, you know, the journals all go back up? Do you feel like this is exactly what's going on? It's a natural flow of journalism, basically, or do you feel like there's another?
I mean, obviously the web has impacted enormously on the profession all over the world. I mean, definitely, at least insofar as, you know, advertising going to Google and New York Times having to cut its stuff, you know, by quarter or by a third or whatever, year after year. So there is a huge impact. What the sense I get from American and European journalists is that they don't take the blogging and the social media as that seriously. I may be wrong. We've been very inward focused. Well, obviously, you know, we've had this Hussam al-Hamalawi telling us, I don't know if you know him, he's one of our very prominent bloggers. So he's been telling us that world revolution is at hand, but, you know, I don't know about that. But sure, there, you know, the whole Occupy Wall Street, whatever movement, that was very much internet driven. How it will impact on mainstream media in the West, I really am not qualified to argue, because there you have very solid, very strong institutions, very powerful institutions with a long tradition. So I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Hi. I just wanted to ask two simple questions. One, do you think this revolution, or in the near future, will it change the relationship with Israel and Egypt, the peace treaty, and Gaza, the border? But to more theoretical grounds, you know, considering that the West, and by that I mean the States and British, French, have consistently in the history of the Middle East and more beyond, de-democratized the nations, either by empowering authoritative regimes, or by coup d'etats, or by just not providing the space for democracy, organic democracy to flourish, or by war.
Sure.
And considering that most of the ideas like communism, socialism, nationalism, liberalism are all Western ideas, which have pretty much failed, all of them, in the Middle East, to what extent is, in your opinion, Islam and democracy a compatible combination? And to what extent is Islam maybe the only way to have a generative force? It's the force that will generate an organic democracy. So I'm asking you basically the relationship between Islam and democracy. What's your opinion as an Egyptian, and what's your opinion in its hopes for transcending these post-colonial ideas that have been failing over and over again?
Well, I mean, I, for one, do not subscribe to the idea that the realm of ideas is culturally determined. I think the realm of ideas is human. And I do not subscribe to the notion that we are inherently and essentially Muslims. Islam is a very important component part of our sense of self, of our identity, of our culture, but there are a lot of, and Islam is not one thing. And Islam has been interacting with the world and with world cultures. And if you look at if you look at the Islam of the Gezira, or are you talking about the Islam of the Abbasids and the or the Umayyads or Ibn Rushd and Andalusia and in Spain? You know, all these are Islams. But having said that, so ideas are ideas. You know, I'm not going to have a Muslim understanding of Darwin and evolution theory. Either agree with Darwin or you don't agree with Darwin. Islam or Christianity or any religion in the world has nothing to do with it. I personally, you know, was somehow had the luck to have a teacher who, in something like 8th grade, explained Darwin to me and put me in huge intellectual crisis but for a while. But I do believe in evolution, of species. So anyway, Islam has nothing to do with that. This is, you know, Islam is a religion like any other religion in the world. But having said that, as I was saying, I am convinced that the process that we have been seeing in Egypt and probably in other Arab countries, but definitely in Egypt, you see the signs, the writing is on the wall. There is a democratic Islam coming up. It is coming up. You see it. You see the Nawara Nigm and you know and the I can give you examples of many people, including even Abu al-Futuh. Abu al-Futuh is a bit of a hypocrite. You know, he speaks from both sides of his mouth. When he talks to Salafis, he becomes a Salafi. When he talks to leftists, he becomes a leftist. But the mere existence of Abu al-Futuh is an indication. And what I think more interesting than Abu al-Futuh is his base of support. These young people who have come out of the Muslim Brotherhood and have lost their membership in the Muslim Brotherhood and are really creating a new discourse. Because in the 18 days, by the way, the Egyptian revolution had given us the first time a kind of discourse that had transcended this fight between secularism and religion. You know, it was a discourse of freedom, of human rights, of a civil, secular state, but at the same time, very much in touch with religion, very much in touch with acceptance of Egyptians' acceptance of themselves as a very devout people, but acceptance of themselves as also as Christians and Muslims. And you had, you know, the Muslims praying and the Christians making a human shield around them to protect them while they pray. And the opposite happens. And then you had this unprecedented thing where the Muslims would pray and the Copts would come and chant their liturgy on the square. So yeah, a democratic Islam, a liberation Islam is coming up. It's going to take time. It's going to be but I personally feel it is coming.
I'm going to ask a question, and then the last question is the lady there with the glasses on her head. My question is, the role of Jazeera in Tunisia and Egypt was quite strong and novel and had huge impact. What is your analysis of the role that they played then, and do you see Jazeera and Arabiya and other satellite channels continuing to be able to have the same impact? If you look at coverage of Syria, of Bahrain, today as compared to Tunisia and Egypt, what's your assessment of the role of the satellites and their future impact?
Obviously, during the 18 days, Jazeera was crucial. It was really crucial. And the regime felt it, and they shut them down for a while, and then you had to go to Jazeera Mubashir, I don't know what, you know, there was it's become less now. It's become less important now because Egyptians have turned to the Egyptian satellite TV stations much more. The on TV, the other one, Dream, I don't know what, and because also somehow, you know, actual coverage of news retreated a bit to trying to make sense out of the news. So now people are watching much more these public affairs programs, these talk shows. So, and we've got stars now. We've got Reem Magid and I don't know who, all these who have these programs where you find, I personally, they bore me, so I really tune into them. But you have huge numbers of Egyptians very jealously watching these programs in the evening, spending the evening in front of TV, watching people debate and so on. So Jazeera's role, I think, has retreated a little. It was crucial during the 18 days, but...
And this is the last question, so we finished right at 6.
My question is, the Egyptian revolution was quite short compared to, in the time, compared to Libya and Syria and Yemen. Some people say that because it was short, the Egyptians couldn't get rid of all the regime members. So do you think this has to do with the instability that Egypt went through? And do you think if it was longer, then it would have been better for the Egyptians and they would have got rid of all the regime members that are still in power right now? Thank you.
See, the thing is, and this is something that army officers are instinctively unable to understand. No one designs revolution. No one can make a revolution. People make a revolution. This is, and actually, one very famous personage who had a direct experience both of revolution and of subverting a revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, has this very clear quote where he says, "No one can make a revolution," and so revolutions take their own shape and their own dynamics, and I personally did not expect it at all, at all, and I'm grateful that we didn't have more dead, and we didn't have. I'm grateful that we're not Syria. I'm very grateful that we're not Syria. Let's fight for 100 years, but I'm very grateful that we're not Syria. That we're, God forbid, my God. And so anyway, yeah, we made something that we were unprepared for, definitely. The revolution went way beyond our abilities in terms of organization, in terms of politics, in terms of strategic thinking. Until today, we do not have a unified leadership of speaking in the name of the revolution. We tried to do this during the 18 days. There were so many efforts and people were meeting and so on, but we couldn't because we were unprepared. We really went beyond ourselves, or the Egyptian people. I mean, I'm not saying myself, but these young people, and I keep telling them, you are great protesters, you are very poor politicians.
Do you think it's still continuing? I mean, the process of the revolution, it didn't stop there? The Egyptians are still continuing the revolution until now?
Oh yeah. It's not, I mean, here revolution becomes, are we going to see something as powerful as the 18 days? I doubt it. But we're going to see continuous political battles on the street, in elective bodies, continuous, in factories, in workplaces, universities, etc.
I told the lie, as is the title of this talk, The Lies and Truths and Myths, but so we actually have one more question. This is the last question.
Thank you for this, permitting me for the last question. Thank you, Mr. Shukrallah, about what you said concerning the reinvention of secularism in the Islamic world and the idea of democratic Islam and liberation Islam. But what I want just you to answer, it's a question already given and you didn't answer. It's about the future of the relations between Egypt and Israel and between Egypt and Gaza. We had a small idea with the story of the gas, but it's much more wide than this. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry, it's left my mind. You asked so many big questions. Look, one would expect that an Egyptian government that is responsive to Egyptian public opinion will have some dignity in relations with Israel. It will not be the government of Mubarak and our ex-foreign minister who, was almost, being slapped around every day and enjoying it. So no, and we had an inkling of that when we had this marvelous man as foreign minister, very briefly, Al-Arabi, Nabil Al-Arabi, brilliant man with great sense of dignity and a real patriot. And immediately, Nabil Al-Arabi, it lasted for a month, he removed the siege of Gaza. He opened the border with Gaza, and he started talking about normalizing relations with Iran. Two crucial. Why should we have a fight with Iran? I was talking, a few months ago, I was talking to an American journalist, and he said, "Aren't you worried about Iran's nuclear capability?" I told him, "No, I'm worried about Israel's nuclear capability, which doesn't seem to bother you at all." And so we had this, small window, and our, soldiers immediately destroyed it. They got this Iranian diplomat who they sent away as a spy. Diplomats by their very nature are spies. So what was the point? I'm sorry, are there any diplomats here? And no, a diplomat writes a report about the country is serving, and it's normal. So anyway, and they blocked the border with Gaza again. Within a week they had subverted the whole process, and then they and the Saudis said Al-Arabi is too much to bear. Let's throw him out in the Arab League, nice Arab League, where he'll have 22 or 28 bosses and be, So yeah, I still didn't answer the question. Once we have a government that is responsive to Egyptian public opinion, then definitely we have to, the first thing that has to be done is to remove the siege of Gaza, is to take, at least no one is really suggesting annulment of the treaty, but at least, the humiliating aspects of the whole thing have to be stopped. No one wants war. We're not ready for war. If our soldiers panic when they see peaceful demonstrators, I'd rather they avoided the Israeli army for the moment at least. So yeah, war is not on the cards, but I think a more dignified, a more independent foreign policy is.
Thank you, Hani. Just as a note, there's a poll that came out today that Shibli Telhami and the Zuhri company did in Egypt, showing that about the same number of Egyptians want to break the peace treaty as want to keep it. And the Arab centers from Doha has polled the entire Arab world, recently showed that a majority of people around the Arab world don't want to have a peace treaty with Israel. So this is still a very contentious issue, which polling probably may not accurately catch. Clearly, a lot of people are not happy with normal relations with Israel, while Israel treats the Palestinians and Syrian occupied land and Lebanese too. So this is still a live issue. I want to thank Hani Shukrallah for his talk. I want to thank the Makdisi family for their support and the legacy of Nadim and the memory of Nadim Makdisi, Sareen Tarajirjan for organizing the work for this event, and all of you for coming out here. Thank you very much.